So this is the Primary Arms 1:4 LPVO, one of the cheapest low-power variable zoom optics you can buy. Now, exactly how cheap is this optic? Well, it's $150. If you're not aware, that's roughly the price of most of your budget-minded lower-end red dots, but for this price, I'm still getting red dot illumination, I'm getting a 1x, and I'm getting all the way up to a 4x. So, for that price, you're definitely compromising and you're definitely having to make some sacrifices. Now, what exactly are those sacrifices? Well, first, it doesn't come with a mount. You're gonna have to supply your own mount. Primary Arms does sell this one on their website. It's very cheap, it's like 30 bucks. I wouldn't really recommend it. It is literally made, there we go. It's literally made in China. Says it right on it. Doesn't mean it's bad. I'm sure the optic itself is made in China, but it is a very cheap feeling mount. It only has one point of securing, and it's not something I'd be super confident with. Looks already like this thing's gonna strip, and I put it on once and took it off once. So I'd really recommend getting something better. What I have here is the American Defense Manufacturing 193 mount, which is a mount that costs significantly more than the optic, but a lot of times the point of failure for optics is the mounting solution. So I'd recommend getting something good. You don't have to go all the way to, ADM and spend $200 plus, but there are things out there like Aero Precision that make some pretty good optic mounts for that sub $100 price point. Now, what are the other sacrifices? One is going to be that illumination. It is pretty bad. It goes all the way up to 11, but it is most certainly not bright enough. Unless you live in one of those like Pacific Northwest states where it's gloomy and dreary all the time and it's raining, you're not going to be able to use this during the day. Especially where I live in a very sunny southern state, this is very, very dim. It's almost unusable on your average day when the sun's out. And even when the sun's not out and it's a little overcast, I still really wasn't able to use this red dot. I recently took a Capable Ink carbine course and I ran this rifle with this optic. I had no issues in terms of zero or durability and anything like that, but the optic was not bright enough to use in the daylight, to use even at closer distances. I had to just turn the illumination off because it was just killing a battery for no reason and just use the crosshair. Now, speaking of the crosshair, this is a second focal plane optic. Now, I'm not expecting a first focal plane optic at $150. And if you're unaware of the difference, I'll explain them really quick as simply as I can. On a first focal plane optic, when you adjust your zoom, your reticle actually increases in size. So as I go to a greater zoom, so as I go towards the 4x, towards the 8x, the reticle increases in size. And what this does is as I'm going through the further distances, my BDC stays consistent. That bullet drop calculation, those little hash marks, the windage marks on the side, they remain consistent across all those distances. So whether I'm shooting at 200 meters from a 1x or 200 meters from the 8x or the 4x, I can use those bullet drop calculating marks to tell me where I should aim. Versus on a second focal plane optic, those BDC marks and all those other calculation marks that I might have in my reticle, they're only useful when I reach that full zoom. Otherwise, they're going to be inaccurate to where my rounds are going. Now, for this optic, it really doesn't matter, though, that it's a second focal plane optic. And the reason is one of its main cons. There are no BDC markers, there are no windage markers, there is no way to collect data to find out where my round is going to go at those further distances. All I have is the center of the crosshair. Yes, there is a small point where the line is thicker and then thinner before the center of your crosshair, so maybe you could use that as a mark, but there's nothing in the manual, there's nothing on the Primary Arms' website that I can find that says to use that as a mark, so you really would have to do some guessing and some testing to find out what those marks are good for, if anything. In reality, you really are either going to have to just guess, not use it at those distances, or do direct adjustments with your scope turrets. And that's going to be pretty difficult in any situation where you don't have all the time in the world, because this does have like permanent scope caps, and while you can take them off fairly easily, it's still going to take some time. And I don't know if I'd necessarily trust these to stay exposed. I would recommend keeping them covered, because I'm sure just bumping into something, while they are nice and clicky and positive, they could easily be knocked out of zero. So I'd recommend keeping your scope caps on at all times. So therefore, this optic is really relegated to closer distances where you don't need those bullet drop calculations, those MOA marks, those MRAD marks, whatever, where you don't really need those. So when I first messed with this red dot, just dry firing at home, the eye relief, the eye box, all that seemed pretty nice. But I was like, you know, once I go to the range and really put this thing through its paces, I'll probably realize there's a reason it's only 150 bucks. And yes, there are several reasons already, like I discussed, of why it's a $150 optic. But when it comes to your eye relief and the ability to use this at close range, I was pleasantly surprised. At the range, running drills where other shooters were running higher end LPVOs or just straight up red dots, I was able to keep up in both speed and accuracy. I was very pleasantly surprised by this optic, and the glass clarity, while not amazing, it is very good for the price. Like I said, the eye relief, very nice. And there's not a whole lot of distortion. Even at one times, I can actually somewhat use this as just a red dot. It's not like some other, even more expensive LPVOs I've seen, where the one times is almost unusable at close range. Also, in terms of durability, I have had a couple drops with this, you know, just around the house. You know, I'd lay it up against a desk and then it would fall, or even at the range, you know, I just kind of chuck it on the ground because that's kind of what I do to my stuff. And this thing has held zero this whole time. I've had no issues with it holding zero from the first time I zeroed it to when I took it out and ran it at that course not too long ago. All my hits, as long as I was using proper fundamentals, were always right where I wanted them to be. So in terms of durability, I've seen no issues. Would I drop this off a building? Probably not. But when it comes to, you know, basic everyday use of your LPVO, I think this will hold up just fine. I would still recommend having either backup irons or a backup red dot, but for the most part, I think it's pretty durable and it holds zero pretty well. Now overall, what use case do I see for this optic? Well, without the BDC, it's definitely limited to closer range engagements. You're not going to be pushing your rifle, even if it is just a 16-inch 5.56 or anything more, out to those further distances. This is a closer range optic. Yes, it has zoom, but it does not have that data of a BDC and windage and things of that nature. Now for airsoft, I see this as a phenomenal optic. If you're an airsoft player and you want an optic, especially for those bigger milsim events, so you can actually see what the hell the enemy team's doing, this is pretty nice. I think this is perfect for something like airsoft because you don't have BDC, which you're not going to use in airsoft because your little airsoft BBs are not going to correlate to whatever hash marks are on this optic, whether it be MRAD, MOA, whatever. It's obviously not going to work. Now, I'm not saying this is only an airsoft quality optic. I'm just saying because it lacks those markings, I think it would excel in airsoft, but this is still totally usable. Like I said, ran it at a carbine course. I've used it even at longer range, at certain ranges, still totally usable. It just doesn't have that data, and so I think you could definitely look into spending $100 more on even another primary arms offering that at least has that information so you know where to hold at those further distances. Now, ultimately, guys, I think this is a good optic. I think it's good to go, but obviously it depends on your use case. So if you guys enjoyed watching this video, if this helped you determine whether or not you want to pick up a primary arms 1-4, if it is for you, go ahead and leave a like down below. If you guys have your own experiences with the primary arms 1-4 or other budget options that you want to share in the comments down below, go ahead, leave that comment. I'd be happy to take a look. Also, guys, I'm uploading new videos every Saturday, so subscribe and stay tuned.